morning. In 1999, my mother took me out to lunch. We pulled over, and before we went to the restaurant, she said, "Jimmy, did I ever tell you I was engaged?" I said, "Well, of course. You were engaged to Dad in 1968. She said, "Well, no, I was engaged one time before that." I said, "No, you forgot to tell me that, Mom." She said, "Yes, I was engaged to Joan Ryan. And 4 weeks before we were about to get married, we broke up. And why is that good? Because Paige, myself, and Marie are here today. Thank you for not completing it the first time, Doug." My mother said, "I'd like for you to meet Doug Ryan." I said, "That'd be great." And I met Doug. And I pulled Doug aside and I said, "Doug, I know you haven't seen my mother in 32 years, but I have to tell you, she's still very smart. She's still very opinionated. And she may tell you what to do a few times." And Doug paused, and he looked at me and he said, "Jim, I have it all figured out. I give your mother 5 commands every day. And by 9 a.m., I can do whatever I want." And it was at that moment that I knew, Doug, you were the real deal. And we're so glad you came into my mother's life. So today, in Eulogy, and I thank John for being here for support, I'm going to share my mother's final 5 commands. Lessons learned that I've learned, that Paige has learned, that hopefully some of you have learned from my mother as a teacher, as a parent, or as a friend. We had a wonderful journey through hospice and through the final 6 years of her life, where she chose to live with cancer. The first command, what my mother would always say to Paige and myself, was, "Jimmy, you have to turn lemons into lemonade. One thing in life you can choose to control is your attitude. And it's so important to have a positive attitude." Well, in 2011, our mother was given 6 months to live. And I'll never forget going down after getting the news. And being the planner my mother was, she planned the funeral. She planned this funeral 6 years ago. The liturgy, all the details, no surprise. And then about 4 months in, she said to Doug, "I'm going to choose to live. And I'm going to have cancer work around me." And Dr. Maurer, her oncologist, pulled me aside a month ago and he said, "Jim, your mother was one of the very few people that she actually had cancer work around her own life." And Doug and my mother traveled extensively. And she went on to live for 6 years. She lived a great 6 years. She wrote me an email in 2014. She was always trying to help people. And a friend of mine had come down with cancer. And she said, "Jimmy, I want you to share this with your friend. I think it's important for you and your friend to know that I'm not fighting battling cancer, that I'm living my life with it, and will do so until the day I die as a result of it. For me, acceptance was important, as was the gratitude for all my blessings. I am at peace, and we're all going to die. Now, I'm not crazy about the idea of being in pain, but that's what palliative care is for. And also, I'm a planner and a control freak. So knowing that my days on earth are numbered has given me the opportunity to go through my closet, clean out my drawers, and of course, plan a spectacular send-off. Anyway, that's that. You're a good person, Jimmy, except for a few times in high school. A wonderful son. And remember, no matter where you are or where I am, you have my love always, Mom." Now, even during her last days of life, my mother kept her positive spirit and her infectious humor. At one point, she had asked me, said, "Jimmy, can you go?" She had gone 4 weeks without eating ice chips, water, and something happened that I'm going to tell you about. And she said, "Jimmy, can you go to Carl's and get a hot fudge sundae?" She goes, "They're beautiful. It'll be like you died and went to heaven." And she paused and she said, "That was probably a bad analogy." We were then in the hospital, we were on the 4th floor, and Doug had gone out for some errands. And Paige and I were asked to take her down to the 2nd floor. And the nurse said, "We need to move your mother to do a procedure." We said, "Okay," it was kind of quick. And as we're going out, she calls the nurse over and she says, "When Doug comes back, can you tell Doug you don't know where I went? Can you tell Doug that I'm missing?" And Paige and I said, "Well, Mom, I think that's kind of mean. He kind of cares about you. He's been at your bedside for 4 months." And she said, "Okay, we won't do that." So the second command, the power of paying it forward in life. My mother truly believed this. 9 years ago, the church asked if anybody would be willing to help these families from Burundi, from East Africa, refugee families. And my mother and Doug raised their hand, to their credit. Doug taught them math, my mother taught them English. I found out a couple months ago they actually paid for some of their education. Well, my mother was given her last rites 3 times. And on the second time, on March 9th, she was unresponsive, labored breathing. And in the morning, she could squeeze my hand. I would be like, Mom, I love you. And she'd squeeze back, I love you. And in the afternoon, nothing. And the doctor said, it's time to say goodbye. And so we said goodbye. And Paige and I were sitting out in the lounge of the hospital, Mary Washington Hospital, where she went to college in Mary Washington. And Marie came running out and she said, Jimmy, you have to come in here. You have to see what's going on. The family from Burundi came back. She hadn't seen them in 6 years. They prayed around her bedside, and my mother woke up. And it was an amazing experience to see what happened with the faith. And she smiled, and she talked, and she went on to live for 40 days. And at first the doctor said people have a rally. When people pass away, sometimes they have a rally for 24 hours or 36 hours. And we thought that might be the case, but it wasn't. That family prayed on her, and she lived for 40 days. She doesn't remember anything of the 3 days prior, when Barbara came down to visit her in the hospital, my dad's wife, when Chip Porter came down. But the moment the family prayed on her, she remembered everything. And Mr. Paul sent me a text from Burundi. Jim, you have to know Mrs. Ryan was special to us in our community. She and Doug helped 6 different families. Assistance to the needy is your most precious legacy. Your mom's soul is in an eternal good place as a reward for the good that she did on earth. So I told my mother 2 days later, after marching to get the second rites for the second time, I said, Mom, I will tell everybody the story of the refugee family and what happened with the prayer. And she said, no. And remember, she pointed a finger at Doug. She said, no, Jimmy, your job is not to tell the story of the refugee family. Your job is to inspire other people to do more to help other people in this world. The third command and lesson learned: share your opinions with conviction, and persistence may make a difference. Now, my mother was so good at giving opinions. Raise your hand if she gave an opinion to anybody here. Very good. Raise your hand if you took her suggestions. So, my mother didn't lack confidence or opinion. She was highly skilled at follow-up and focus. In fact, I had to come up with 2 strategies to manage that. And the first was, at some point, I said, look, I kept getting, I would get defensive, we'd get a disagreement, and finally I said, Mom, thank you for your suggestion. And that seemed to work, so you get out there and say thank you for the suggestion. And then Chip gave me another idea when she kept repeating herself, Jimmy, I think you should do this with the kids, or you should do this. And I would just put my finger up and say, oh, that's a good idea, Mom. And that would be the second time. And then the third time she'd say, that's right, Mom, that's a great idea. And the fourth time, like, Mom, that's a good idea. She finally got the point about persistence. But my mother loved Foxborough. She always said, you can take the person out of the borough, but you can't take the borough out of the person. It's been so inspiring to read all the comments on Facebook and the wonderful things and the cards that people have said about my mother as a teacher, and things that she did that I never knew about that really made a difference in people's lives. She was so proud to help kids. She loved helping them with college essays. Did she help you a little bit, John? 10 hours, 20 hours? She once told me she spent 100 hours helping John. 100 hours, is that true? 100 hours with his college process. And most parents and grandparents, when it comes to college, would say, oh, wherever you go, I want you to be happy. It's your choice. Not my mother. John, I think you should go to Georgetown. And John applied to many colleges. And on the day the letter from Georgetown came into the mailbox, John was in track practice, and my mother grew impatient. And she called you a few times, if you remember, and left a message, and she said, you know, I'm dying. I'm going to heaven. And I may not go to heaven, but I'm at least going to purgatory. And I don't know if I'm going to be here when you get back from the track practice. And she actually was encouraging some steam cleaning with the iron to open up the mail, and she said that that's what she used to do with my mail. Well, we waited, and John finally came back, and he called my mother, and he told her that he got into Georgetown. And she was happy, very happy. So she'll be very proud of you. And she's proud of all of her grandchildren. Last year, I asked my mother and Doug, I said, where are you going for Thanksgiving? And they said, oh, we're going to Dr. Mauer's house. I said, you're going to your oncologist's house for Thanksgiving? And I saw Dr. Mauer at the hospital, and I said, Dr. Mauer, can I ask you a question? You have hundreds of patients. I said, do they all come into your house for a gift? And he shook his head and he said, no, Jim, just your mother. Now, it turns out my mother helped his kids. And Bree, I don't know if Bree's here or going to Lake Furlong today, but she got to Wellesley College, and my mother played a very big role and invested a lot of time in his daughter. So that was great. So that's the third command. Share your opinions with conviction. Persistence does make a difference. The fourth command, with 2 to go, have strong faith in God and believe in yourself. My mother was a teacher, and she asked me to document her final hospice experience. I have 16 pages of notes, I have pictures, I have videos. Bailey Collins is kind enough to be putting together a documentary this summer, which she's going to enter for a festival and do very well for her school. So thank you for doing that. My mother said, my goal has always been to make a positive difference in people's lives as a teacher, as a parent, as a friend. And as she asked me to document her experience, Paige and I asked her on that second floor, Mom, can you tell us some of the happiest times of your life? And do you remember what she said? She said, right now. She was very much at peace with where she was going. And she really appreciated the family coming together and talking, and agreeing and disagreeing. And she said as long as she had the final word, that would work out. But there's a lot to be said for that. And a lot of people are afraid to talk about death or the next steps or planning. And it's really important to have those conversations with family because we don't know how long we're going to be here. And that was her point to me and to my sister. And it was so peaceful to hear that this was a good time in life for her. And in fact, 2 days later, after March 9th, I asked her, I said, Mom, what was that like when you were unresponsive and you couldn't, what was it like for you? And she said, I could hear everything you were saying. So for those of you that have been with people that have passed away, they can hear you. And she told me that she heard 2 voices. And she said, the first voice I heard was, Joan, it's time to come home. And then she heard a different voice, and it said, no, it's not time yet. And she said she saw the most peaceful and beautiful light. And she was very much happy with where she was going. And that was really reassuring to hear that. And thankfully, God let her live for another 40 days. The final command, lesson number 5 from my mother, appreciate people. And whenever possible, write handwritten thank you notes to express your gratitude for people and special gifts. My mother would send a lot of gifts. And once my children said, why does Amy send gifts? But with the gifts, she sent framed thank you notes along with the gifts. With instructions for my kids to write thank you notes to which kind of defeats the purpose of giving gifts. But anyway, she got a point across. On March 14th, I was staying in the hospital with her. We were taking shifts, and she waited for Doug to fall asleep. And I was starting to sleep, and she said, Jimmy, wake up. I said, what? Tell me about the eulogy. I said, oh, okay. So I had to go through the eulogy, and I shared all this with her, so she knows what I said. And she gave me a suggestion. And I actually really liked it. And when we're talking about thank you notes, she goes, Gene, how about we leave thank you notes at the exit of the church? We buy a couple hundred. She thought a couple hundred would be here, which is pretty close. She goes, we'll buy a couple hundred thank you notes. And as people are walking out of the church, we ask them to get a thank you note and write a note to somebody that maybe they haven't talked to in a while, that they appreciate, that made a difference in their life. And I have it on video, and she goes, I like that. We'll give them homework. One final piece of homework from me. So I do encourage you to complete your homework in the baskets at the end and pick up a thank you note. Finally, Doug and my mother had several perennial good-natured debates, including she would say to Doug, I will love you forever. And Doug would counter, I will love you for as long as we live. Well, as usual, Doug came around to her point of view. And as he shared recently with me, I'm not letting go, even a little bit. I will love her forever. My mother loved her brothers, John and Jim, very much. Family was very important to her. And you were both very good to her. She liked the name that you gave her, the Queen. In fact, she asked that the Lake Pearl ceremony today, celebration, would be appropriate for a queen. She put that pressure on her two brothers. So thank you for being here. And before I close, I'd like to share my complete homework assignment with all of you. It's a thank you note that I'm writing. Dear God, thank you for being the most amazing and devoted husband, best friend, and caregiver for my mother. Your strong admiration for each other, your love of life, new experiences were infectious. You once told me that when you reconnected with my mother, it was like the sun came up again. Well, the sun came up every minute of every day for my mother because of you. And we are forever grateful for that gift. So as we approach Mother's Day tomorrow, I would remind your grandchildren what their grandmother always said. Always remember that no matter where you are, where I am, know that you have my love always. We know that you'll have an eternity of Mother's Days in heaven. Thank you for the difference you made in all of our lives.